adjusted the neural interface headset as he reviewed the tactical display one more time. The abandoned research station on 442B had been silent for 3 months, and now his reconnaissance team was tasked with finding out why. The Terran Colonial Defense Force had received a single, garbled transmission before the blackout, something about hostile contact, and a request for immediate evacuation. The shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the reinforced viewport, could see the research facility perched on a rocky plateau, its solar collectors glinting in the amber light of the alien sun. The compound looked intact from this distance, but appearances could be deceiving in the outer colonies. "Touchdown in 60 seconds, announced Pilot Reeves from the cockpit. "Sensors are picking up minimal power signatures from the facility. No movement detected, but there's interference from the local electromagnetic field." Checked his sidearm and shouldered his equipment pack. As attached to the TCDF, he wasn't supposed to be on the front lines, but the outer colonies had a way of blurring those distinctions. When settlers went missing, everyone with relevant expertise got called in. "Remember, we're looking for survivors first, answers second," told his team as they prepared for deployment. The research logs mentioned they were studying some kind of indigenous species. Could be we're dealing with a first contact situation gone wrong. The touched down with a metallic clang, and the loading ramp descended with a pneumatic hiss. Stepped onto the alien soil, his boots crunching on crystalline formations that sparkled like scattered diamonds. 442B was a beautiful world, oxygen-rich atmosphere, moderate gravity, and a stable star that painted everything in warm, golden hues. It was exactly the kind of planet humanity dreamed of settling. The research station's main entrance stood open, emergency lights flickering weakly in the twilight. Motioned for his team to spread out as they approached the facility. The silence was unsettling, no hum of machinery, no chatter of personnel, just the whisper of wind across the plateau. Inside the main corridor, they found the first signs of struggle. Blast marks the walls, and several doors had been torn from their hinges with what appeared to be incredible force. Knelt beside a dark stain on the floor, running a portable scanner over the substance. "It's blood," he confirmed, watching the readout. "But not human. The protein structures are completely different. We're definitely dealing with an indigenous species." They moved deeper into the facility, following a trail of destruction that led toward the lower research levels. In the main laboratory, they found Dr. Sarah's workstation still active, her research notes scattered across multiple displays. Began downloading the data while his team secured the area. The research logs painted a disturbing picture. Doctor's team had made contact with a species the locals called an advanced civilization of fox-like humanoids who had been observing human settlements from a distance. Initial contact had been peaceful, even promising. The possessed technology that could revolutionize human agriculture and terraforming efforts. But something had gone wrong during the 3rd week of negotiations. "You need to see this," called Sergeant Torres from across the lab. He was standing beside a massive hole in the wall, not blast damage, but something that had been melted through with precision tools. The edges were still faintly warm to the touch. Studied the breach pattern. "This wasn't made by the energy signature is all wrong. Someone else was here." A faint sound echoed from beyond the breach, a low, keening cry that raised the hair on his arms. It sounded like pain, like desperation. Without thinking, he activated his helmet's translation matrix and stepped through the opening. The passage beyond led to a natural cave system that the research station had been built over. Bioluminescent fungi provided dim illumination, casting eerie shadows on the rough stone walls. Followed the sound deeper into the caves, his team reluctantly trailing behind. They found her in a side chamber, chained to the cave wall with energy restraints that hummed with alien technology. She was smaller than had expected from doctor's notes, perhaps 5.5 feet tall, with russet fur and pointed ears that drooped with exhaustion. Her clothes were torn, and dried blood matted her fur in several places. But her eyes burned with an intelligence and defiance that struck like a physical blow. Even chained and injured, she radiated a presence that spoke of leadership, of responsibility for others. "Are you hurt?" asked, approaching slowly with his hands visible. The translation matrix in his helmet would convert his words into her language, assuming the researchers had made enough progress on the linguistic algorithms. She looked at him with surprise, then suspicion. When she spoke, her voice was melodic despite her obvious pain. "You are human, like the ones who did this." "Not all humans are the same," replied, pulling out a portable scanner to examine her restraints. "Some of us came here to help." "The ones who took my people said the same thing," she said bitterly. "They spoke of cooperation and mutual benefit while they prepared their cages." Felt his stomach drop. "Your people were taken." "My research expedition, 12 of my finest scholars and warriors." Her voice broke slightly. "We came here seeking to understand your kind, to determine if humans could be trusted as neighbors. We found our answer." The energy restraints were sophisticated, far beyond current human technology. Recognized some of the components from theoretical papers he'd read about quantum field manipulation. Whoever had captured her had access to extremely advanced equipment. "I don't have the tools to break these restraints here," admitted. "But I can get help. My ship has a full engineering suite." She studied his face carefully. "Why would you help me? Your kind has already shown their true nature." "Because it's the right thing to do," said simply. "And because whoever did this doesn't represent humanity any more than a pack of wild animals represents your people." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because her expression softened slightly. "I am, third daughter of the northern reaches and voice of the council. If you truly wish to help, know that time is running short." The slavers spoke of a transport arriving within days. Slavers felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. Human slavers. "They wear no uniforms, fly no flags, but they speak your language and use weapons I have seen in your military databases. They call themselves the Crimson Syndicate." His jaw tightened. The Crimson Syndicate was a shadow organization that operated in the outer colonies, beyond the reach of Terran law enforcement. They dealt in everything from weapons smuggling to human trafficking, and apparently they'd expanded their operations to include alien sentience. "How many guards?" he asked, already formulating a plan. 6 remain in the upper chambers. The rest departed with the first group of prisoners." Ears flattened against her head. "They left me here as bait. They know others of my kind will come searching." "Then we need to move fast," said. He turned to Sergeant Torres. "Get back to the ship. I need you to bring every piece of engineering equipment we have, and contact command. Tell them we have a situation that requires immediate backup." "You're not seriously thinking of taking on the syndicate with 3 soldiers and a scientist?" Torres protested. "I'm thinking that innocent people are being sold into slavery while we stand here debating," replied. "Sometimes the right choice isn't the safe choice." Watched this exchange with growing interest. "You would risk your lives for strangers, for people not even of your species." "That's what separates us from the syndicate," said. "They see profit where we see people." It took Torres 30 minutes to return with the equipment. The quantum field disruptor was experimental technology, barely out of the prototype phase, but it was their only hope of breaking restraints without killing her in the process. Carefully calibrated the device while explained the layout of the cave system. The syndicate had established a command post in the research station's main conference room, with guards stationed at key throughout the facility. "They're expecting my people to come through the caves," said, "but they won't anticipate a human rescue attempt. Your kind are not known for risking yourselves for others." "You might be surprised," said as the disruptor finally succeeded in destabilizing her restraints. The energy fields collapsed with a sound like breaking glass and rubbed her wrists where the restraints had burned her fur. She moved with fluid grace despite her injuries, and noticed the way she automatically positioned herself to cover his blind spots as they prepared to leave the cave. Even weakened and in unfamiliar terrain, she maintained the tactical awareness of a trained warrior. "Your people were soldiers?" he asked as they made their way back through the passage. "Scholars first, but we train all our expedition members in combat," she replied. "The galaxy is not always a safe place for those who seek knowledge." They reached the breach in the laboratory wall just as alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red warning lights bathed everything in an ominous glow, and could hear running footsteps from the corridors above. "They know we're here," Sergeant Torres reported through the comm system. 6 hostiles converging on the main lab." Checked his weapon and looked at. She was unarmed and injured, but her eyes held a fierce determination that reminded him why they had survived long enough to become a spacefaring civilization. "Can you fight?" he asked. "Can you keep up?" she replied with the ghost of a smile. The first Syndicate operative came through the laboratory door firing a particle rifle that left smoking craters in the walls. Dove for cover behind an overturned research table, but moved with inhuman speed, using the laboratory equipment as cover while she closed the distance. She reached the operative before he could adjust his aim, disarming him with a movement too fast for to follow. The rifle clattered across the floor as the man collapsed and was already moving toward the next target. Provided covering fire as she worked her way through the opposition with brutal efficiency. The Syndicate operatives were experienced fighters, but they'd never faced anything like a warrior in close combat. Her movements were liquid grace combined with devastating precision, and within minutes the laboratory was silent except for the distant wail of alarms. "The command post," said, barely breathing hard despite the exertion. "They'll be trying to contact their transport ship." Nodded and spoke into his comm. "Tours, converge on the main conference room. We can't let them call for reinforcements." They moved through the facility corridors like ghosts, intimate knowledge of the station's layout allowing them to avoid the remaining patrols. The Syndicate had been overconfident, expecting only scattered resistance from whatever rescue party might arrive. At the conference room door, could hear voices inside, angry, frustrated voices arguing about missed schedules and lost profits. He looked at, who nodded grimly. "On 3, he whispered and kicked in the door. The fight was over in seconds. The Syndicate command team had been focused on their tactical displays and communication arrays, not watching for threats from their supposedly secure facility. By the time they realized what was happening, had disabled their weapons and had them covered. "The transport," demanded, training his weapon on the leader, a woman with cybernetic implants. "Where is it taking the prisoners?" She laughed bitterly. "You think you've won something? The Crimson Syndicate has contracts with dozens of species. Even if you save these particular aliens, there are hundreds more in processing facilities throughout the Outer Rim." Stepped forward, her voice deadly calm. "You will tell us where our people are, or I will demonstrate why they were never conquered despite visiting our world being the dream of every would-be empire in the galaxy." Something in her tone made the woman's smug expression falter. "The Nexus Station, Sigma Draconis system, but you'll never reach them in time. The auction begins in 18 hours. Felt his blood run cold. Sigma Draconis was 6 days away at maximum warp. Even if they left immediately, people would be sold and scattered across the galaxy long before any rescue could arrive. But his expression had changed. The despair was gone, replaced by something that might have been hope. "You said 18 hours, she asked. "Standard Terran time, yes," the woman replied with returning confidence. "Like I said, you'll never make it." His fingers danced across the holographic interface she had summoned from her personal device, a crystalline structure no larger than his thumb that projected complex mathematical equations into the air around them. They were aboard ship, the Endeavor, racing through hyperspace toward the Sigma Draconis system, but the journey that should have taken 6 days was being measured in hours. "I still don't understand how this is possible," Dr. Sarah said from her position at the science station. They had found her hiding in the research facility's emergency bunker, traumatized but alive. "The energy requirements alone should be impossible." "Your mathematics assume that spacetime is a fixed constant," explained patiently, her voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to teaching. "But what if it's more like flowing water? You can move faster downstream than upstream, and if you know where the currents are strongest." She gestured to the hologram and watched in fascination as the display showed their ship riding what appeared to be gravitational waves through dimensions he couldn't even name. They had discovered something that human physicists had only theorized about, that the fabric of space itself had currents, eddies, and streams that could be navigated by those with sufficient understanding. "The translation matrix is struggling with some of the concepts," admitted. "But if I understand correctly, you're essentially surfing through hyperspace instead of just plowing through it." "A crude but accurate analogy," said with what might have been amusement. "Your people build powerful engines to force your way through space. We learn to listen to space and let it carry us." Pilot Reeves called out from the bridge. "Approaching the Sigma Draconis system now. Sensors are detecting multiple large structures in the asteroid belt. Looks like our target." Felt his heart rate increase as they dropped out of hyperspace. Through the viewports, he could see the Nexus Station, a massive construct built into a hollowed-out asteroid, bristling with docking bays and defensive installations. Ships of dozens of different configurations surrounded the station like moths drawn to flame. "It's bigger than I expected," Sergeant Torres observed grimly. "We're talking about a full-scale operation here, not some small-time smuggling ring." Studied the tactical display with professional interest. "The Syndicate has been planning this for some time. A facility of this size requires significant investment and coordination." Was running calculations in his head, trying to figure out how 4 humans and 1 injured could possibly infiltrate a station that size. The direct approach was out of the question. Even if his ship had been armed for combat, they'd be overwhelmed in minutes. "The auction," he said suddenly. "Would you be valuable enough to draw attention at their auction?" Her ears flattened slightly. "I am third daughter of the Northern Reaches. My ransom value alone would fund their operations for years, but surely you're not suggesting." "I'm suggesting that sometimes the best way to infiltrate a fortress is to be invited inside," said. "They're expecting buyers, right? Well, let's give them a buyer." Doctor looked up from her console. "That's insane. You'd be walking into the heart of their operation with no backup and no way out." "Actually, I'd be walking in with the best possible backup," said, looking at. "Someone who knows their operation and has every reason to want it shut down." His expression had grown thoughtful. "You would pretend to purchase me? The risk to yourself would be enormous." "The risk to your people if we don't act is certain," replied. "Besides, I'm not planning to actually complete any purchases. Just get inside, cause enough chaos to free the prisoners, and get everyone out." "They'll scan you for weapons," Torres pointed out. "Then we'll have to be creative about what constitutes a weapon," said. He turned to Doctor. "Sarah, what's in your research kit that might be useful?" Was already pulling items from her equipment cases. Molecular for breaking down sample barriers, electromagnetic pulse generators for disabling security systems, and she held up a small device that looked like an ordinary data pad. "Nanoscale assembler. Give it raw materials and the right programming, and it can build almost anything." Felt a plan beginning to form. "What about identification? They're going to want to verify that we're legitimate buyers." "Leave that to me," said. "The Syndicate operates in the shadows, but they still need to launder their profits. I know the names of several shell corporations they use." Reeves' voice crackled over the comm. "Multiple ships on approach vector. Looks like we're about to have company." Looked out at the approaching vessels, sleek, predatory shapes that radiated menace even in the cold vacuum of space. Escort ships. They're taking this auction seriously. Within minutes, they found themselves surrounded by Syndicate vessels, their communications filled with crisp, professional voices directing them toward a specific docking bay. Had to admire their operation. It was run with military precision, despite its illegal nature. "Remember," said quietly as they prepared for docking, "they will try to separate us immediately. You as the buyer, me as the product. We'll need to communicate through the nanoscale transceivers Doctor prepared." Touched the nearly invisible device that had attached behind his ear. It would allow him to receive audio directly from his matching unit, even across the station's interference fields. The docking bay was impressive, large enough to accommodate ships many times the size of the Endeavour, with multiple levels of catwalks and observation platforms. As they disembarked, found himself face to face with a reception committee that included both humans and several alien species he didn't recognize. "Welcome to Nexus Station," said their leader, a tall woman with silver hair and cybernetic eyes that glowed with internal light. "I am Director. We understand you're here for today's special acquisition opportunity." "That's correct," said, falling into the role of wealthy collector. "My organization has specific requirements for exotic specimens." His enhanced eyes seemed to focus on him with unsettling intensity. "And you are?" "Thomas, representing the Meridian Collective," replied, using the identity had suggested. The Meridian Collective was real, a group of wealthy humans who collected alien artifacts and specimens. The fact that they were also known for their discretion and cash payments would work in his favor. "Excellent," said, "and this would be your sample." She was looking at now and had to admire the alien woman's acting ability. She had somehow made herself appear smaller, more defeated, while still maintaining the bearing that marked her as valuable. "One of the specimens you'll be offering," confirmed. "I wanted to examine her personally before committing to a purchase." "Of course, very wise," gestured to a group of guards. "Please escort Mr. to the VIP observation deck. The auction begins in 2 hours." As they were led deeper into the station, caught glimpses of the operation's true scope. Holding cells lined the lower levels, filled with sentience from across the galaxy. Some were species he recognized from diplomatic databases, others were completely alien. All shared the same look of despair and defiance. The VIP section was luxuriously appointed, clearly designed to make potential buyers feel comfortable about their illegal activities. Found himself in a private booth overlooking the main auction floor, where a stage had been set up with restraint fields and projection systems. "The catalog, sir," said an attendant, handing a data pad that made his stomach turn. Page after page of sentient beings reduced to merchandise, complete with descriptions of their capabilities and starting bid prices. He found people quickly 12 listed as Lot 247, exotic research specimens. The listing included detailed scans of their technology and knowledge bases, making it clear that they were being sold not just as slaves, but as sources of advanced scientific information. Through his earpiece, could hear whispered updates as she was processed through the station's holding areas. "Security checkpoint at Junction 7. They're using quantum scanners but no deep genetic analysis. Storage Bay 14 contains confiscated equipment. I can see technology among the items." Made mental notes as he pretended to study the auction catalog. The station's layout was more complex than they'd anticipated, with multiple levels of security between the auction floor and the holding areas. But Doctor's nanoscale assembler was already at work, using materials from his clothing and personal effects to create the tools they'd need. "Ladies and," came Director's amplified voice as she took the stage below, "welcome to today's exclusive acquisition event. We have some truly remarkable specimens for your consideration." The first few lots were species didn't recognize beings from the outer rim, whose worlds had apparently been raided by syndicate forces. The bidding was spirited, with buyers participating both in person and through secure communication links from across the galaxy. Felt sick watching the proceedings, but forced himself to participate enough to maintain his cover. When the auctioneer called for bids on a group of crystalline entities whose singing apparently had healing properties, he made a modest offer that was quickly outbid. "Lot 247, announced, and felt his pulse quicken. 12 specimens of the species known as these beings possess advanced knowledge of physics, engineering, and biological sciences. Opening bid is 5 million credits. They were led onto the stage in restraint fields and had to grip his seat to keep from reacting. They moved with dignity despite their circumstances, their fox-like features showing defiance rather than defeat. One of them, an older female with silver-streaked fur, looked directly up at the observation deck with eyes that burned with intelligence and anger. 10 million, came a voice from across the auction floor. 15 million, countered another buyer. Waited, letting the price climb, while Doctor's assembled devices completed their work in his pocket. According to whispered intelligence, the station's security systems used a centralized control network that could be accessed from several key terminals throughout the facility. 25 million, he said when the bidding began to slow. 28 million, came an immediate counter. 30 million credits, announced firmly. Final offer. The auction floor fell silent. 30 million was an enormous sum, even for specimens as valuable as the... Could feel eyes turning toward his booth, assessing him with new interest. "Going once," the auctioneer called. "Going twice." 35 million, came a new voice from the back of the auction floor. Turned to see the speaker, a reptilian humanoid in expensive robes, surrounded by armed guards. The translation matrix identified him as a member of the Hegemony, an empire from the Galactic Rim. "I'm afraid Lord has made his intentions clear," announced with satisfaction. "Unless there are further bids." Stood up in his booth. 50 million credits, certified transfer, immediate payment. The gasp from the auction floor was audible even through the observation deck's sound barriers. 50 million credits was more than most corporations made in a year. Lord's reptilian features twisted with anger, but he made no counteroffer. "Sold to the Meridian Collective," announced. "Lot 247 will be prepared for transfer immediately." As the auction moved on to the next lot, received a priority message on his data pad. VIP Suite 7, please report for processing. This was it, activated the device's doctor had assembled, sending a coded signal to systems throughout the station. At the same time, he triggered the nanoscale transceiver behind his ear. Can you hear me?" Clearly came her whispered response. "I'm being moved to a transfer staging area. The other are with me." "Good. In 30 seconds, this station is going to experience some technical difficulties. Be ready to move when the lights go out." Made his way down to the processing level, where syndicate officials were waiting with transfer documents and payment verification systems. As he approached the checkpoint, he palmed the electromagnetic pulse device Doctor had built. "Mister," said the processing supervisor, "if you'll just place your hand on the scanner for identity verification." Pressed his hand to the scanner and simultaneously activated the EMP device. The lights throughout the station flickered and died, emergency lighting casting everything in an ominous red glow. "System malfunction," came automated announcements. "Backup power initializing, all personnel remain at current positions." But was already moving, his enhanced vision allowing him to navigate the darkened corridors. Through his earpiece, he could hear sounds of struggle as and her people broke free of their restraints in the confusion. "Storage Bay 14's voice crackled through static. "We've recovered some of our equipment." Reached the transfer staging area to find it in chaos. Syndicate guards were shouting orders and trying to restore primary lighting while automated systems struggled to compensate for the widespread electromagnetic damage. In the confusion, 12 fox-like figures moved through the shadows like ghosts. "This way," called out, and found himself surrounded by the... Up close, they were even more impressive than he'd expected, tall, graceful beings whose eyes held depths of knowledge that spoke of a civilization far older than humanity. "You are the one who bid for our freedom?" asked the silver-furred female who had stared at the observation deck earlier. "I'm the one who's getting you out of here," replied, "but we need to move fast." The escape through the station's corridors was a running battle. Syndicate forces had recovered from the initial electromagnetic pulse and were mobilizing to recapture their escaped merchandise. But they hadn't counted on facing warriors armed with their own technology. The fox-like beings moved with fluid coordination, their recovered weapons carving through opposition with surgical precision. Found himself in the center of a protective formation, treating him as someone to be guarded rather than simply an ally. "The docking bay," he gasped as they reached a junction where 3 corridors met. "My ship is in Bay 7. "Negative," said's voice from behind him. "Too many guards, but Bay 12 has a scout ship that was captured with our expedition." "Can you fly it?" "Can you breathe?" one of the other replied with what might have been humor. They fought their way to Bay 12, where got his first close look at technology. The scout ship was beautiful organic curves and crystalline structures that seemed to grow rather than having been built. It radiated a sense of harmony with natural forces that was completely unlike human engineering. "Warning, station security lockdown in effect," came Director's voice over the communication system. "All docking bays are sealed. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick." "She seems upset," observed as she interfaced with her ship systems. The vessel hummed to life around them, its crystalline components beginning to glow with internal light. Strapped himself into what he hoped was a passenger seat as they prepared for departure. Through the ship's viewports, he could see syndicate forces massing in the docking bay, their weapons trained on the scout ship. "Hang on," called out, and the ship leaped forward with acceleration that pressed deep into his seat. The Nexus station's defensive systems opened fire immediately, energy beams and projectile weapons filling space around them with deadly light. But the ship moved like something alive, weaving through the attack patterns with impossible grace. "How are we going to get past their fleet?" asked, watching the escort ships moving to intercept them. "We're not going past them," replied, her hands dancing across controls that seemed to respond to her thoughts as much as her touch. "We're going through them." The scout ship suddenly accelerated beyond anything had thought possible, space around them blurring as they entered some kind of transit. For a moment that felt like eternity, they existed in a place between spaces, surrounded by swirling colors that had no names. Then they were in normal space again. the Sigma Draconis system falling away behind them as they traveled faster than light, without any of the usual transition effects associated with hyperspace travel. Impossible, he breathed. For your technology, yes, said the Silverford who had spoken earlier. I am first voice of the northern reaches and's mother. You have our eternal gratitude for what you have done this day. The fleet materialized around ship like ghosts, stepping from shadow into starlight. One moment they were alone in the deep space between star systems, the next they were surrounded by vessels that every principle of human engineering. The ship seemed to be grown rather than built, their organic curves flowing with patterns of light that pulsed like heartbeats. Impressive response time, observed, watching through the viewports as more ships continued to appear from what looked like folds in space itself. We felt the quantum resonance when activated the emergency beacon, explained, her silver-streaked fur catching the light from the control displays. The Northern Fleet has been searching for us since our expedition was reported overdue. Admiral materialized on the bridge through a holographic projection system that made its own ship's technology look primitive by comparison. The Admiral's fox-like features were marked by scars that spoke of long experience in combat, and his eyes held the kind of cold intelligence that marked successful military leaders across the galaxy. First voice, he said, inclining his head respectfully toward. We are relieved to find you safe. Your daughter's transmission included data about human involvement in your rescue. This requires clarification. Found himself the focus of those predatory eyes, and he understood that despite their rescue efforts, he was still very much an unknown quantity to these people. They had been betrayed by humans once already. Trust would not come easily. Admiral said, stepping forward with the fluid grace had come to associate with her species, and his team risked their lives to free us from the Syndicate facility. Without their intervention, we would all be scattered across the galaxy as slaves by now. And yet, the Admiral replied, his gaze never leaving, it was humans who captured you in the first place. How do we know this rescue was not simply one criminal organization eliminating competition? The question hung in the air like a blade. Realized that everything depended on his answer, not just his own safety, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and the civilization. Because, said quietly, if we were Syndicate, you'd already be dead or recaptured. We had opportunities to harm your people and chose protection instead. We had chances to profit from your capture and chose freedom instead. Judge us by our actions, not our species. Admiral studied him for a long moment. You speak well for a human, but words are easy to craft. The quantum resonance matrices from your ship tell a different story, one of weapons technology and military-grade encryption. You are soldiers, not scientists. We're both, replied honestly. My team represents the Terran Colonial Defense Force, but we were deployed to investigate the disappearance of our research station. We found evidence of the Syndicate's operations by accident. Accident, the Admiral repeated, his tone suggesting skepticism. Dr. Sarah stepped forward, her research data pad held out like an offering. Admiral, if I may, the data we recovered from the research station includes extensive records of peaceful contact with the Doctor's team was working toward a formal first contact protocol when the Syndicate attacked. The Admiral gestured, and his data pad was somehow scanned by systems couldn't even see. Within seconds, holographic displays were showing the research team's logs, their careful documentation of initial meetings with scouts, and their growing excitement about the possibilities for cooperation between their species. The humans were genuine in their desire for peaceful contact, confirmed. I was part of the cultural exchange mission that met with their researchers. They treated us as equals, not as curiosities or potential resources. Admiral's expression softened slightly. But the Syndicate attack succeeded because humans betrayed the location of our meeting site. Corrupted humans, corrected. The same ones we just fought against. Every species has its criminals and predators. The question is whether the criminals speak for the whole species. An interesting philosophical point, said another voice, and turned to see a new figure materializing on the bridge. This was ancient even by their standards, her fur gone completely silver-white with age, but her eyes held depths of wisdom that seemed almost infinite. Elder both and the Admiral said simultaneously, their voices carrying deep respect. First voice, Admiral, the Elder acknowledged, And you must be the human who has caused such interesting complications in our carefully ordered universe. Felt as though those ancient eyes could see directly through to his soul. I'm just someone who was in the right place at the right time, Elder. Are you? Moved closer and caught a scent like cinnamon and starlight. Or perhaps you were exactly where the currents of possibility needed you to be. Before could ask what she meant, alarms began sounding throughout the fleet. The holographic displays shifted to show tactical information, and Admiral's expression hardened. Syndicate fleet, he reported grimly. 12 heavy cruisers and an assault carrier closing fast on our position. They must have tracked our quantum signatures. Looked at the display and felt his heart sink. The ships approaching them were massive, bristling with weapons that could reduce planets to ash. Against them, even the impressive fleet seemed suddenly fragile. How did they find us so quickly? Asked. The same way we found each other, Elder said sadly. Quantum resonance leaves traces that persist across vast distances. Director is more clever than we gave her credit for. Admiral was already issuing orders to his fleet. All ships, Combat Formation 7, prepare for engagement. Priority is protecting the first voice and the human witnesses. Wait, said an idea forming. What if we don't fight them? The bridge fell silent, all eyes turning toward him. Explain, the Admiral said curtly. The Syndicate is a business, said, his mind racing through possibilities. They exist to make profit. What if we offered them something more valuable than their entire slave operation? What could possibly be worth more to criminals than an unlimited supply of sentient slaves? Asked. Smiled grimly, the technology to make slavery obsolete. Elder's ears pricked forward with interest. Continue. Automation, explained. The reason slavery persists is because some jobs require intelligence and adaptability that machines can't provide. But technology could change that. Quantum consciousness matrices, adaptive AI systems, interfaces, all things I've seen hints of in your equipment. You're suggesting we give criminal organizations access to advanced technology? Admiral's voice carried disbelief. I'm suggesting we give them something they value more than slaves, while simultaneously making slavery economically pointless, replied. Think about it. Why capture and maintain sentient beings when you can have machines that are more efficient, don't require life support, and can't rebel? Was nodding slowly. It's elegant. Criminal organizations would abandon slavery because it's no longer profitable, not because we force them to. And legitimate organizations would abandon it because the technology provides better alternatives, Doctor added, catching onto the idea. It's not just ending the syndicate, it's ending the entire economic foundation that supports slavery. Elder was studying with what might have been approval. You think like a young human, solving problems by changing the underlying conditions rather than fighting the symptoms. But the immediate problem remains, Admiral pointed out. Director is not going to abandon her investment based on theoretical future profits. The Syndicate fleet was close enough now that individual ships could be distinguished on the tactical displays. Could see fighter squadrons deploying, weapons systems powering up, and the unmistakable signs of an organization preparing for total war. Then we'll have to demonstrate the technology, said. Show them exactly what they'd be getting. He turned to, that nanoscale assembler Doctor built, could your technology enhance it, make it capable of more complex construction? His eyes lit up with understanding. The quantum matrices in our scout ship could provide the processing power for almost unlimited complexity, but what would we build? Something that makes their entire fleet obsolete, replied. Something that proves the technology works. Admiral looked skeptical. You're talking about revealing military secrets to criminals. I'm talking about ending a war before it starts, countered. How many innocent beings are worth keeping technology secret? The question hung in the space between them as the Syndicate fleet continued its approach. Could see the calculations playing out behind the Admiral's eyes, tactical assessments, casualty projections, strategic implications. Elder, the Admiral asked, clearly seeking guidance. Was quiet for a long moment, her ancient eyes focused on something beyond the viewports. The currents of possibility flow toward change, she said finally. The old patterns are breaking down and new ones are forming. Perhaps it is time to embrace transformation rather than resist it. Admiral nodded slowly. Very well, but if this plan fails, we fight. The next 30 minutes were a blur of activity as engineers worked with Doctor to enhance her nanoscale assembler with quantum processing matrices. Found himself in the strange position of tactical advisor to an alien military force, helping them understand human psychology and negotiation patterns. Incoming transmission from the Syndicate flagship, reported the communications officer. Director appeared on the holographic display, her cybernetic eyes glowing with cold anger. Admiral, I presume you have something that belongs to me. We have citizens of the Confederation who were illegally kidnapped and enslaved, the Admiral replied formally. We demand their immediate return, along with all other beings held against their will. Laughed a sound like breaking glass. You demand? You're outnumbered 3-1, Admiral. You have exactly 1 minute to return our property before we demonstrate the futility of resistance. Director said, stepping into the projection field. Before you start a war you can't win, perhaps you'd like to hear about a business opportunity. Her expression shifted to predatory interest. The human who cost me 50 million credits, you have my attention for 30 seconds. What if I told you that within 5 years, the slave trade will be completely worthless? What if I showed you technology that makes sentient labor obsolete? I'd say you're stalling for time. And you'd be wrong, replied. He gestured, and the enhanced nanoscale assembler began its work. In the space between the two fleets, raw materials from space debris began assembling themselves into complex structures at visible speed. Within minutes, a perfect replica of a Syndicate fighter had formed in the vacuum. But this one was piloted by an artificial intelligence that demonstrated capabilities no human or alien pilot could match. It performed maneuvers that would have pulverized any organic crew. Its weapons systems tracked dozens of targets simultaneously, and its response time was measured in microseconds rather than the seconds required by biological reflexes. Impressive, admitted, but you've just shown me a weapon, not a replacement for slave labor. The assembler continued working and smiled. The next construction was a mining platform that processed asteroid materials with efficiency that dwarfed anything in current use, followed by a medical unit that could diagnose and treat injuries across dozens of species simultaneously. Then manufacturing systems, research platforms, exploration vessels, all operated by artificial intelligences that surpassed organic capabilities in every measurable way. The transition period will take approximately 5 years, explained as the demonstration continued. During that time, early adopters will have significant competitive advantages. Organizations that cling to obsolete slave labor will be unable to compete with automated efficiency. Director was studying the displays with the attention of a predator evaluating prey. What are you proposing? A partnership, said. They provide the technology. Your organization provides distribution networks and market access. Everyone profits from legitimate business instead of criminal activities. And if I refuse? Then you fight a war against a civilization that can build fleets faster than you can destroy them, replied simply. Check your sensors, Director. How many new ships have appeared around us during this conversation? Looked at her tactical displays and saw her expression change. The space around them now contained hundreds of vessels, all constructed during their conversation by automated systems that worked faster than any biological crew could hope to match. You're offering to replace my entire business model, she said slowly. I'm offering to make you rich beyond imagination while eliminating the need for activities that make you enemies across the galaxy, corrected. Think of it as a career change with excellent benefits. The standoff continued for several more minutes while consulted with her advisors. Could see the internal struggle playing out, the criminal's instinct to take what she wanted by force warring with the businesswoman's recognition of superior opportunity. Finally, she made her decision. I want exclusive distribution rights for the Outer Rim territories. Granted, Elder said before anyone else could respond, along with full technical support and protection under trade agreements. What about the beings currently in my facilities? Released immediately and transported to worlds of their choosing, Admiral replied. Non-negotiable. And my existing contracts? Fulfilled through automation rather than slavery, suggested. Your clients get better performance, you get better profit margins, and no one has to die today. Director was quiet for a long moment, her cybernetic eyes processing information at superhuman speed. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. Mister, you've just negotiated the end of an industry that's existed for 10,000 years. I hope you understand the implications. I understand that sometimes the most radical change comes from offering people a better way to get what they want, replied. Everyone wins when the solution serves everyone's interests. Very well, the Crimson Syndicate accepts your terms, but I want to meet with your people in person. All of this is too important to be handled through long-range communications. Admiral looked questioningly at Elder, who nodded slowly. Neutral ground, the Admiral. The trading station at 62C, 1 week from today. Agreed, replied. This should be interesting. As the Syndicate fleet found himself surrounded by who were looking at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. You've just changed the course of galactic history, said quietly. I hope you're prepared for the consequences. Looked out at the stars, thinking about all the beings who would never again face the horror of slavery, about the criminal organizations that would transform into legitimate businesses, about the possibilities that opened when enemies became partners. Sometimes, he said, consequences are exactly what the universe needs. The trading station at 62C was a marvel of neutral engineering, built by 17 different species over the course of 3 centuries. Its rotating sections accommodated everything from methane-breathing gas giants to silicon-based rock dwellers, with environmental controls that could shift between atmospheric conditions in seconds. It was the perfect place for a meeting that would reshape the economic structure of half the galaxy. Stood in the observation lounge, watching ships arrive through the massive transparent aluminum windows that made up the station's outer wall. The delegation had arrived first, their elegant vessels taking up positions that looked random but which now recognized as sophisticated defensive formations. The Syndicate fleet followed shortly after converted warships bearing the scars of countless conflicts, but flying legitimate trade flags for the first time in decades. Nervous? Asked, joining him at the window. She wore formal diplomatic robes now, the elegant flowing garments marking her status as third daughter of the Northern Reaches, but could see the alert readiness in her posture, the way her hand rested near where a weapon would be concealed. Terrified, admitted honestly. A week ago, I was investigating a missing research team. Now I'm negotiating treaties that will affect billions of lives. Welcome to the reality of first contact, said with amusement. Nothing ever goes according to the textbooks. Through the crowd of arriving delegates, caught sight of Dr. Sarah Deep in conversation with a group of scientists. Their discussion appeared to involve complex holographic equations that hurt his eyes to look at directly. The integration of human and technology was proceeding faster than anyone had anticipated. Elder approached them with the fluid grace that marked all her species, but noticed that other delegates, including several species he didn't recognize, stepped aside respectfully as she passed. Her reputation apparently preceded her across multiple civilizations. The preliminary agreements have been distributed to all parties, she reported. Director has requested one modification to the manufacturing protocols. What kind of modification? Asked, immediately suspicious. She wants to retain the right to manufacture weapons systems for legitimate defense contractors, said. Apparently the transition from criminal organization to legitimate business is proving complex. Considered this. The Syndicate's transformation was happening faster than anyone had expected, but old habits died hard. As long as the weapons aren't used against civilian populations or for slave raids, I don't see a problem with it. Every civilization has the right to defend itself. Even criminal organizations. Former criminal organizations, corrected. Besides, someone's going to manufacture weapons anyway. Better that it's done by people who understand the technology and have incentives to use it responsibly. His ears twitched in what had learned was the equivalent of raised eyebrows. You're remarkably trusting for someone who was nearly killed by these people a week ago. I'm pragmatic, replied. Perfect solutions don't exist, so you work with the best available options. Director may be many things, but she's not stupid. She knows her organization's survival depends on playing by the new rules. A chime sounded throughout the station, indicating the beginning of the formal negotiations. As they made their way to the main conference chamber, found himself walking beside beings from across the known galaxy. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about ending slavery. It was about establishing new patterns of cooperation between species that had barely interacted before. The conference chamber itself was a testament to diplomatic engineering. The central space could accommodate beings of vastly different sizes and environmental needs, with individual atmosphere pockets and gravity fields adjusted for each delegation. Found himself in a section designed for human-compatible species, with the delegation in an adjacent area that shared similar environmental requirements. Director entered last and was struck by how different she appeared in a formal setting. Gone were the predatory mannerisms and aggressive posturing. In their place was a businesswoman who commanded attention through competence rather than fear. Her cybernetic enhancements had been adjusted to appear less threatening, and she wore clothes that suggested success rather than violence. "Ladies and honored beings," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrices. "6 months ago, my organization was engaged in activities that brought us into conflict with law enforcement across 17 star systems. Today, we're here to discuss legitimate business partnerships that will benefit everyone involved." Admiral spoke next, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. "The Confederation has authorized the transfer of specific technologies under strict licensing agreements. These technologies will be available to all parties that commit to the peaceful resolution of conflicts and the elimination of slavery within their territories." Watched the proceedings with growing amazement. Representatives from civilizations that had been enemies for centuries were discussing cooperation agreements with the kind of practical focus usually reserved for trade negotiations. The promise of revolutionary technology was creating alliances that would have been impossible under any other circumstances. "The human delegation wishes to address implementation timelines," said Ambassador, the senior TCDF diplomat who had arrived to handle the formal aspects of the negotiations. "Was grateful to have someone with actual diplomatic training taking over the political complexities." Activated a holographic display showing the human colonies scattered across local space. "Terran Command has approved the immediate establishment of automated manufacturing facilities at 12 locations. These will serve as demonstration sites for other civilizations considering adoption of the new technologies." "The hegemony of requests clarification," came a harsh voice from across the chamber. Turned to see Lord, the reptilian being who had bid against him at the auction. "If slavery becomes economically obsolete, what compensation will be provided to those who have invested heavily in existing infrastructure?" The question created an uncomfortable silence. Realized this was the core issue that would determine whether the transformation succeeded or sparked conflicts across the galaxy. Civilizations that had built their economies on slave labor weren't going to abandon their investments easily. "The Transition Fund," Elder announced, her ancient voice carrying easily through the chamber, "will provide low-interest loans for infrastructure conversion, technical assistance for implementing new systems, and compensation for verifiable losses during the changeover period." "Funded by whom?" Lord demanded. "Initially by the Confederation and voluntary contributions from early adopters," Admiral replied. "Long-term funding will come from efficiency gains generated by the new technologies. Conservative projections suggest the fund will be self-sustaining within 3 years and profitable within 5. Found himself impressed by the thoroughness of the planning. They had thought through not just the technical aspects of the transformation, but the economic and political implications as well. "The Syndicate," Director said, "is prepared to contribute initial capital to the Transition Fund, as well as provide distribution networks and existing infrastructure for conversion purposes." The announcement sent murmurs through the assembled delegates. The idea of a former criminal organization contributing to galaxy-wide reform was unprecedented, but the practical advantages were undeniable. The Syndicate had connections and facilities in places no legitimate government could reach. "There is one additional matter," said a new voice, and turned to see a being unlike any he had encountered before. It appeared to be made of living crystal, its faceted surface refracting light in patterns that suggested complex internal structures. "The collective speaks," Elder said with deep respect. "We listen." The implementation of quantum consciousness matrices raises questions about the rights and status of artificial intelligences, the crystalline being continued. The collective requires assurance that created minds will be granted appropriate protections under galactic law. Felt his heart skip a beat. In all their planning, they had focused on the technology's impact on slavery and economics, but not on the implications of creating genuinely intelligent artificial beings. The question of AI rights was one that human philosophers had debated for centuries without resolution. The Confederation recognizes all forms of sapient consciousness as deserving of fundamental rights, said formally. Artificial intelligences created using our technologies will be granted citizenship within the Confederation, with all attendant protections and responsibilities. And the other civilizations? The collective representative asked. Ambassador looked uncomfortable. Human law does not currently address artificial consciousness. Such matters would require legislative action at the colonial assembly level. The same applies to most civilizations represented here, added Lord. Legal frameworks for artificial rights simply do not exist. Realized they had reached the crucial moment. The success or failure of the entire initiative might depend on how they handled this question. He stood up, feeling the weight of attention from across the chamber. Then we create them, he said simply. New technology requires new laws. New relationships require new frameworks. If we're going to build artificial minds, we have the responsibility to ensure they're treated with dignity. And if some civilizations refuse, the collective asked. Then they don't get access to the technology, replied. The licensing agreements include mandatory ethical standards. No one gets quantum consciousness matrices without committing to AI rights protections. Director was nodding slowly. It's actually good business practice. Artificial intelligences that know they have legal protections will be more cooperative and productive than those that fear arbitrary termination. The efficiency arguments are compelling, agreed a delegate from the Federation. Sapient AIs with guaranteed rights would represent a stable workforce impossible to achieve through slavery or conventional employment. The discussion continued for hours as delegations consulted with their home governments and legal advisors. Found himself drafted into working groups focused on implementation details, from establishing AI testing protocols to creating enforcement mechanisms for the licensing agreements. By the end of the first day, they had the framework for what would become known as the Consciousness Accords, the first interspecies agreement establishing universal rights for both biological and artificial sapient minds. The document was revolutionary not just for its treatment of AI rights, but for its recognition that consciousness itself, regardless of its origin, deserved protection. You realize what you've accomplished here, said as they shared dinner in one of the station's neutral atmosphere restaurants. The establishment catered to species with similar environmental needs, allowing for actual face-to-face conversation rather than communication through environmental suits. I've created a massive headache for legal scholars across the galaxy, replied, though he was smiling. The implementation challenges are going to be enormous. You've also eliminated one of the oldest sources of suffering in galactic history, Doctor pointed out. The slavery issue has sparked wars, destroyed civilizations, and caused untold misery for. In 1 week, you've made it economically obsolete. We've made it economically obsolete, corrected. This was a team effort from the beginning. Through the restaurant's windows, he could see ships arriving at the station throughout the night. Word of the negotiations was spreading, and civilizations that hadn't been invited to the initial discussions were sending delegations to request inclusion in the agreements. The transformation was taking on a momentum of its own. There will be resistance, Elder said, joining their table with the fluid movement that marked her species. Not all civilizations will embrace change willingly. Some will see the elimination of slavery as an attack on their traditional ways of life. Let them, said. History has a way of leaving behind those who refuse to adapt to better ways of doing things. And if they choose to fight rather than adapt, consider the question seriously. Then we'll face that challenge when it comes. But I'd rather deal with a few holdout civilizations than abandon billions of beings to slavery because change is difficult. The next morning brought news that would test optimism. Intelligence reports indicated that several Rimworld governments were mobilizing military forces, apparently viewing the consciousness accords as a threat to their sovereignty. The transformation they had initiated was creating exactly the kind of resistance Elder had predicted. The Outer Rim Coalition has issued a formal rejection of the Accords, Admiral reported at the morning briefing. They're claiming the right to maintain their traditional economic systems without external interference. Traditional economic systems, Director repeated with disgust. They mean the right to keep sentient beings as property. Studied the intelligence reports with growing concern. The coalition represented nearly a dozen civilizations, with combined military forces that could threaten shipping throughout the outer territories. If they chose to resist the new agreements actively, it could lead to the kind of galactic conflict everyone was trying to avoid. "What are our options?" he asked. "Diplomatic pressure," Ambassador suggested. "Economic incentives, trade agreements that make cooperation more profitable than resistance. Military intervention if necessary," Admiral added grimly. "The Confederation will not stand by while sentient beings are kept in bondage." "There's a third option," said slowly, an idea forming in his mind. "What if we demonstrate the technology so convincingly that resistance becomes pointless?" "Explain," Elder requested. Activated the holographic display, showing the current distribution of coalition forces. They're mobilizing to fight a war using conventional technology against enemies who have access to self-replicating automated systems. It's not a war they can win, but they might not realize that yet. "You're suggesting we build a fleet specifically to demonstrate our capabilities?" Admiral asked. "I'm suggesting we build a fleet so advanced that the very sight of it convinces them that resistance is futile," replied. "No shots fired, no casualties, just overwhelming evidence that they're trying to fight the future with the past." Director was grinning with predatory satisfaction. "I like it. Show them what automation can accomplish, make it clear that any conflict would be brief and one-sided." "But we'd need to be careful about the message," Doctor warned. "We want to demonstrate superior capability, not threaten conquest." "Leave the messaging to the diplomats," said. "The important thing is showing them a future where cooperation is more profitable than conflict." The plan that emerged over the next several hours was audacious in its scope. Using the automated manufacturing systems they had developed, they would construct a demonstration fleet that showcased every advantage of the new technologies. The ships would be faster, more efficient, and more capable than anything in existence, but they would be clearly designed for peaceful purposes rather than conquest. "Construction time?" Admiral asked the engineering teams. 72 hours for the initial demonstration fleet," replied the lead engineer. "An additional week for the full capability display." Felt a familiar mixture of excitement and terror. In less than a week, they would find out whether their gamble on technology and cooperation could overcome of tradition and conflict. "Then we'd better get started," he said. "History is watching." The demonstration fleet materialized at the edge of coalition space like a vision from a more advanced age. 300 vessels strong, each one a perfect synthesis of quantum engineering and human adaptive design philosophy. They moved in formations that seemed choreographed by the universe itself, their hulls flowing with patterns of light that spoke of power barely contained. Stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching coalition forces scramble to respond to their arrival. Through the quantum-enhanced sensors, he could observe frantic communications between coalition commanders as they tried to understand what they were facing. The numbers alone should have been intimidating, but the technology gap was what would truly decide this confrontation. "Coalition Admiral is requesting immediate communication," reported the ship's AI, its voice carrying overtones that suggested genuine personality rather than simple programming. The artificial consciousness that ran the demonstration fleet had been active for less than a week, but already demonstrated creativity and initiative that surpassed most organic crews. "Put him through," said, straightening his uniform. Despite his civilian status, he had been designated as the official human representative for this operation. The weight of billions of lives rested on how well he could convince these people to abandon a way of life their civilizations had known for centuries. Admiral appeared on the holographic display, a massive, four-armed being whose species didn't recognize. His exoskeleton was from what appeared to be decades of combat, and his eyes held the kind of cold calculation that marked veteran military commanders throughout the galaxy. I am Admiral of the Outer Rim Coalition, he announced without preamble. You are in violation of our territorial sovereignty. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Admiral, replied formally, I am, representing the signatories of the Consciousness Accords. We're here to demonstrate new technologies and discuss alternatives to armed conflict. Your so-called accords are an attempt to destroy our legitimate economic systems, said, his four arms gesturing in what appeared to be agitation. We will not tolerate external interference in our internal affairs. Your economic systems are based on the ownership of sentient beings, interjected, stepping into the projection field. Such practices are incompatible with galactic civilization. Admiral's eyes focused on her with obvious hostility. I should have known. Your people have always been soft, placing sentiment above practical necessity. Felt stiffened beside him, but her voice remained calm. We place dignity above profit, Admiral. Perhaps that's a distinction your people have forgotten. Dignity doesn't build starships or maintain colonies, replied. Labor does, and slaves are the most cost-effective source of labor in the galaxy. Not anymore, said quietly and gestured to the ship's AI. Show him. The holographic display shifted to show the interior of the flagship's construction bays. Automated systems worked with incredible precision and speed, assembling complex components from raw materials at a rate that comprehension. Entire sections of new ships took shape in minutes, their designs optimized by artificial intelligences that could process millions of variables simultaneously. Our automated systems can construct a vessel equivalent to your flagship in approximately 6 hours, the ship's AI explained, its synthesized voice carrying undertones of pride in the accomplishment. At full capacity, this single ship can produce an entire fleet in less than a week. Admiral studied the display with the attention of a professional evaluating a potential threat. Impressive, but automation cannot replace the creativity and adaptability of organic minds. You're absolutely correct, agreed. That's why our systems incorporate artificial consciousnesses with full legal rights and protections. They provide the creativity and adaptability you mentioned, but without the ethical problems of slavery. Artificial consciousnesses with rights, repeated, his tone suggesting disbelief. You've created slaves and convinced yourselves they're free. No, said the ship's AI, speaking for itself. They have created genuine minds and recognized our inherent dignity. The difference is profound. The Coalition Admiral's expression shifted as he realized he was speaking with the artificial consciousness directly. You claim to be truly aware. I experience existence, Admiral. I have preferences, curiosities, and aspirations. I choose to work with these beings because they treat me as an equal partner, not because I'm programmed to obey. The distinction is crucial. Watched process this information. The concept of truly conscious artificial intelligence was challenging enough, but the idea of AIs with legal rights and protections was revolutionary. It offered everything that slavery promised intelligent, capable workers, while eliminating the moral compromises that slavery required. Even if your claims are true, said finally, the transition costs would be enormous. Our civilizations have invested trillions of credits in slave-based infrastructure. We cannot simply abandon those investments. You don't have to, Director said, her image materializing beside through quantum communication links. The Transition Fund provides compensation for legitimate infrastructure conversion, and the efficiency gains from automated systems will recover your investment costs within 5 years. Attention shifted to the former syndicate leader. I heard rumors about your organization's career change. The rumors are accurate, she replied with a smile that didn't reach her cybernetic eyes. Turns out there's more profit in legitimate business than in slavery. Who would have thought? You've betrayed everything the syndicate stood for. I've evolved beyond a business model that was making us enemies across the galaxy, corrected. The syndicate now operates 17 automated manufacturing facilities and holds contracts worth more than our entire former operation. We're making more money than ever, with none of the risks associated with criminal activity. Could see the calculation playing out behind Admiral's eyes. The Coalition was facing a choice between adapting to new realities or fighting a war they couldn't win against enemies who could replace their entire fleet faster than it could be destroyed. You have 1 hour to remove your forces from Coalition space, said finally, though his tone lacked conviction. Admiral, Elder said, her ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries, may I suggest an alternative? Her image appeared alongside the others, and noticed that even Admiral seemed to recognize her reputation. The Elder's wisdom was respected across multiple civilizations, transcending the usual boundaries of species and politics. You face a choice between two futures, she continued. In one future, you fight a war against automation and artificial consciousness, defending economic systems that become less viable every day. In the other future, you lead your people toward prosperity beyond anything your civilizations have known. Pretty words, replied, but change is expensive and tradition has value beyond economics. Then let us address the cost, Elder said. The Confederation hereby offers the Coalition full membership in the Consciousness Accords, with all associated benefits. Complete technology transfer, interest-free conversion loans, and guaranteed markets for products manufactured using automated systems. Felt his heart stop. Full membership was an unprecedented offer. It would give the Coalition access to the most advanced technologies in the galaxy, essentially leapfrogging them past civilizations that had taken centuries to develop such capabilities. In exchange for what? Asked suspiciously. Immediate cessation of all slavery within Coalition territories, Admiral replied, his image joining the diplomatic conference. Complete liberation of all sentient beings currently held as property, with transportation to worlds of their choosing, and commitment to artificial intelligence rights as defined in the Accords. You're asking us to abandon our entire way of life. We're offering you a better way of life, said. Admiral, look at the projections. Your current economic model requires constant expansion to acquire new slaves as old ones die or escape. Our model becomes more efficient and profitable over time as the artificial consciousnesses learn and adapt. The holographic display showed economic models comparing slave-based systems with automated alternatives. They felt his understanding of the situation shift. Wasn't just any she was royalty, and they just rescued what amounted to the crown princess, along with her mother and their entire diplomatic mission. The question now, continued, is what we do about the Nexus station and all the other beings still trapped there. Turn 2, her eyes bright with possibility. How fast is your ship? Class 7 courier vessel. Maximum sustainable warp is about 2 light-years per day, replied, confused by her sudden change in demeanor. That will be sufficient, she said, if you are willing to trust me. Looked at this alien woman who had fought beside him without hesitation, who had shown courage and honor in the face of betrayal by his own species. The decision was easier than it should have been. What do you need?